I'm employed by the federal government at the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is the most effective socialized medicine system in man. Our veterans live longer and healthier lives because they are exempted from the capitalist market for healthcare. And that makes me incredibly proud. So I hope that capitalism makes me or the people that I hang out with every day want to see veterans and healthier veterans.
Because I think that there's capitalism underlines almost anything, and most people are motivated by capitalism, whether it's pursuing their own personal interest, business interest, economic interest. Because capitalism is basically that motivation to achieve the results that you set forth to.
Unrestrained capitalism is making a record of the world. What we need is the kind of cities and the kind of countries where people count, and where farmers count, and we're taking care of the results. And that's not happening the way our system is set up now. It's got to change.
Yeah.
Okay?
So, like I said, these are, people at these street fairs and parks and stuff in Cleveland, pretty much straight responses. And what I do, the main thing I try to do is get people to slow down before they respond. Usually, sometimes they'll do that on their own, but there's definitely some patterns with certain demographics. Like you get these white-haired, older white males that just hit yes, actually really aggressively, and just keep walking. They don't want to talk. And at first I was like, well, it's not working right, because I want to get them to slow down and consider. And then I realized, okay, again, I'm not going to be able to hit everyone here. But the nice thing was that they see the signs, this massive thing, and it says right there that the people that have passed by this area, it's working for you, but there's this big number of people, and it's usually about half, that say it's not working for them, and they see that, So these are some other people that voted. This guy was at a barber college and said the healthcare industry was predatory, and so I basically take all these responses, and they're going to be put into a book, and then I've been making some videos and stuff too. And this woman said it works for her because she loves shopping. This is a family. This guy was funny. He said that he didn't think it worked. He said the dad said it works, but it has some problems. And the son said he didn't think it worked, and that everyone in school said it likes it, so he doesn't like it. I think that was great. And he wouldn't take this out of his mouth during the picture, which I also was glad. Anyway, these two ran a nightclub in Cleveland that transformed this whole neighborhood. It was kind of a rundown neighborhood. They brought a venue there, bands coming to play, been there for a really long time. And they hired, there's all these people that work there now. There's a thrift store and a record store in it. It's it became a cultural center. And this was the last week that they were open. And they had to close because they had roof damage, And then basically their business worked, but they just weren't ready for that kind of hit. And who knows what's going to happen in that neighborhood because of that. So anyway, these are some of the stories I've been able to get. This guy was a doctor who said that it worked for him because he did complex endoscopies, which are basically going into people's guts with a camera and fixing stuff. And that because of the American diet that was fueled by capitalism, he was able to do all, it funded all this research and work, and he was able to do more sophisticated surgeries than ever before. And I was kind of laughing, that is really dark. And he's like, no. And then he's like, I guess it kind of is. So anyway, these are some other folks. But this guy said, this is Cleveland, why would I vote true? Which is sort of what I expected. But in the end, most people, it's very split. and oftentimes people are really surprised, like, why would half people vote true? And the false votes are pretty solid. The true votes are actually really complicated. So like I said, I actually had a guy, white hair, with his polo shirt that has a country club logo on it, you know, hit true, walk away. You get those kind of people, but it's much more often, you know, this like, I've seen like, I'm really, really sorry, and then they hit true, you know? And, or they'll vote true and say, you know, I'm in the teachers union, and we work really hard so that it works for me, and I know it doesn't work for everyone else. Or like a lot of that, like where I know it does kind of work for me, but I know it doesn't work for everyone else. And you also get these people who have a different kind of conscience who say it does work for me, but it doesn't work for everyone else, so therefore it doesn't work for me, and it's false. But like I said, the true votes are a little bit more complicated, and there's some rationale. So anyway, all this stuff from Cleveland was from last summer around July, and then Occupy started, and the capitalism conversation became like a national conversation, which was, I didn't expect at all. And it's spread all over the place, and the conversation has opened up, and there's in a variety of ways, and you know, I really hope that it continues. And when it first happened, I was like, oh shit, you know, like the whole purpose of my piece is sort of destroyed, you know. But then I realized, no, this is like, you know, going back to that chart again, like I'm working down here, we're all kind of working down here. The piece also is hitting people in different areas of the country that you know, there might not be Occupy encampments, or that would, you know, the kind of person that wouldn't necessarily walk into an Occupy encampment or into a meeting, but will be drawn in by flashing lights and a podium and a big red, white, and blue sign, you know? So, you know, later on through my career, I hope to like that this whole thing moves further along that way. But the other part of, I think, that works as far as creative activism is working well with others and finding organizations that are working on this kind of stuff that you can team up with. So again, that idea I talked about at the beginning of the artist is supposed to be alone, solitary, isolated, frustrated, and then die. You know, like that doesn't serve us very well. And I think that there's a lot of these myths like infantilize artists, and you know, mean that we can't take care of ourselves, or we can't work with like big organizations that are actually organized and expect you to come to meetings on time. So we don't need to do everything. We don't need to create policy. We don't need to like find ways of implementing it, or like, you know, become legislators. But we can like find the skills that we have that we know how to do well, and then these other people that know how to do what they do well and work together. Okay, so the piece was designed basically to be like very simple but not simplistic. So like the voting thing really kind of pares down that conversation, but in a way that's not simplistic. So I've said this a lot, but you know, there's really only yes or no. It's true or false. That's it. There's two buttons. And sometimes people will say, well, I need a third button, and I'm like, no, it's black and white, true or false. You have to decide, you know. And it's just meant to like make them think further. If they can hit maybe, it actually stops the thinking process. So and the yes no true false thing too is meant to kind of get them to reject the whole question, or the idea that you can only pick one thing or the other, which has these other kind of implications. And the whole piece sort of is meant to be this game that once they've entered it, you know, seen it and decided they're going to vote, they're kind of like in my game, or in this joke that then I can mess around with a little bit. Also, it's meant to be sincere but not serious. So to me, like being serious and being funny are not antonyms. You can be funny while talking about something that's incredibly serious, kind of like what I talked about before. The last part is like everyone wants to know what the score is, and I actually don't know. I still haven't added it all up. But the main point is that it actually doesn't matter. That it's about, you know, the yes and the no don't really, or true and false don't really reflect the actual sentiments but it's more about that process of them evaluating whether or not capitalism is working for them. So like deep down, everyone else, like that's an entry point for people, like, oh, what's the score and how can I interpret that information? And I will put it all together, I just haven't done it yet. So it's the spectacular visual with mesmerizing flashing lights, and it includes active voting that has this implied obligation, it's like you're supposed to vote. And when you register your opinion, that just draws people into the game that I talked about before. This game where like this supposedly matters, and at every point it's meant to get people to like slow down and consider and think about something that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Like I said before, if I asked you if I could talk to you about nuclear weapons, you'd probably reluctantly or really hesitantly say yes. But if I was some kind of game or a joke, then like we can start a conversation that might not happen. Let's see. My last thing that works is having a double standard. So this is just sort of about creative activism in general and moving forward, but having like a dual strategy of like, I'm going to try to get people to reevaluate capitalism and realize that it's fucked. But if I get them to think about it, that's okay. That's still good work, right? So like having a goal that's like way out there on the horizon, but like any progress you make forward is a good thing, and that's something you can learn from and incorporate. That basically you're an artist and it's an art practice. That you're not going to make one piece that moves people all the way along those steps, and then it's like a career, so that if this is how, by only holding yourself to like the high standard of like, I set out to revolutionize the United States and I didn't quite get there, like this is why activists burn out. And so if you can realize the successes that you've had and try to build on them, it becomes a much more sustainable practice. So the other thing is like failure and that this isn't really part of like, this is something we really emphasize when we're teaching with grassroots activists. But like when you're working in an organization that's say working to like prevent the resegregation of schools in North Carolina, right? You come up with this strategy and there's kind of a lot of money at stake and a lot of people's effort and it doesn't work out. And then you have to go to the funder and say, we tried this. And of course you make it sound as successful as possible. And like if we read all the reports from nonprofit organizations, we'd think we lived in a utopia, because it has to work. But when you start incorporating creativity, like not everything's going to work. And this was like a huge revelation to me when I was in undergrad studying photography. And I would shoot a roll of 36 pictures, and I was broke and like counting up how much every roll of film costs in development and all that stuff. And I wanted 36 good pictures out of a roll of 36 photos. And then I realized like if there was one or two good photos out of a roll of 36, that was actually a success. And that taking the other 34 was sort of, you have to do that to get to the two. Now that doesn't play very well. Like if you had a 1 to 18 or a 1 to 36 ratio in a nonprofit organization, you'd be fired. So we need to like fail quicker, fail on a smaller scale, and then also like reconsider how we evaluate what success is within organizations, so we can say like, go to like the funder or go to the people above you and say, we're going to do 6 projects and 5 of them are going to be terrible, one of them might be pretty good, but we're getting somewhere else, So that's sort of more about evaluation. And the other part is like that it's got to be kind of fun, and that creativity is really killed by overthinking, but you do have to plan somewhat for it to work. So there's this balance. And if you can try things in like a low stakes way, where like, if this general strike doesn't become a big general strike on May 1st, there's no way to test that or like start something small with that. It's like all or nothing, right? That's maybe just the nature of that. But as we come up with other actions or other smaller projects, like how can we implement it in this little way and see if it works and then build it up? And also make it fun. So I promised you a lot of information. There you go. I hope it wasn't fully overwhelming. And thanks very much. Yeah, absolutely.
If anybody wants to ask questions or talk about anything, discussions, you do that.
Yeah.
We do have some food and some drinks downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I saw your piece at the report, but I have to say, my immediate reaction is, what the hell is this thing doing here? Because you're in the middle of Lincoln, very affluent community, and of course, the overwhelming vote was that capitalism was working for people, which is true.
Yeah.
I voted 3 times, by the way, on the other side, and I couldn't sway the balance in my direction. But I understand now, I didn't get at that point that part of what you're doing is making the question real. In other words, for a long period of time, people didn't even raise the question. For a long period of time, the word was not even used.
Yeah.
And during the Reagan period, they didn't talk about capitalism, about free enterprise.
The business climate.
Right, the business climate. And it was really only in recent years that the powers that be have felt strong enough to reintroduce the word capitalism in a positive way. And then 2008 happens, and of course, that created an opening for the kind of work that you're doing, which leads me to my point, and that is that it doesn't seem to me that it's always possible to make an impact with artistic creativity. That a lot of it has to do with the social context and the historical period in which one engages in that kind of work.
Yeah.
So you talked about the fact that you were almost disappointed when the Occupy movement broke out. Obviously, your piece had the impact that it did because people were beginning to feel that their situation had to be reevaluated.
Yeah.
The one thing that bothers me, though, is that never anywhere does anybody talk about what capitalism is. The assumption is everybody knows what it is. For some people, it's going shopping, right? But that's an absurd definition of capitalism.
Yeah.
For some people, it's your ability to make your own economic decisions, another absurd definition. So part of what has to happen, it seems to me, is there a way of using your work as a wedge for raising the larger question? What exactly do we mean by this?
Yeah, that happens.
It's a bit of rejecting or accepting.
Yeah, I'll get people that often ask, like, what is capitalism again? Can you help me? Which at first I was like, how do I answer that? Like, and like, if someone's asking that doesn't know, like, on the spot, like, what is it? And so we ended up, there's a pamphlet thing that we hand out about it because people usually have, like, they're baffled by it and have some questions. So in there is, like a sort of, that's, a rudimentary definition of it.
How do you define it in the pamphlet?
Now we have putting on spot here. I think it's something like an economic system based on competition and profiting off of resources, both human and natural, or something like that. And then there's like a sort of in-person back and forth thing too, where like I have like these questions or responses. Like it's become much more of this like live performance and improvisation where we were at this high school in where was the high school? Where you had these kind of wealthy kids, and one of them was like, well, we need capitalism because that's how we determine the value of everything. And I said, I know that. I turned to Victoria every night and I told her I love you $50,000. And like that goes back to that thing too. Of, like you can't win the debate with a joker, and like I don't even have to win. All I have to do is like slow you down and like kind of muddle your thinking enough to like where you then have to reconcile it again. And then the other one was like, I started asking him how much his hand was. He's like, what do you mean how much is your hand? Like, I want to buy your hand. How much is your hand? How do we determine the value of your hand?
By the way, that is determined.
Yeah, we started talking about that. Yeah. But as far as you said something about the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like these things can only be there's a climate or a time period where this can happen. And with the Center for Creative Activism, Steve and I are working on this book, called, I think it's called The Art of Activism now, we keep changing the name, but we've interviewed all these artists about this, and this guy, Scott, had a really good point about that. It's like, you know, you run the best race you can. You like come up with a plan and try to do it as best you can, and some days you're racing against Lance Armstrong. And there's nothing you can do. You know, you do your best, but you're just going to get beat. And so yeah, that's part of it. And I think, but using those models that I talked about, like of the steps, and like thinking about what your goal is at that point, and who the audience is, I think that's a good way of like being more successful.
Even in Cleveland, if you connect with the cooperative movement there, Cleveland is one of the few places in which there really is an attempt to develop an anti-cap or non-capitalist alternative economic system. You've got public institutions like hospitals and universities buying up products being made by worker-owned co-ops and kind of integrated network.
Yeah.
Did you have any connection with those people?
No, there was a bike shop, a co-op bike shop.
Yeah, no, it's different.
Yeah. I was there, I was like there on residency for the 6-week stretches for a total of 3, and then there was a big chunk of it that was too busy. But did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you for this. I want to talk about using art to get a point across. So,
Yeah.
one of the things I was thinking with your project that might be, I guess maybe the end result might be the opposite of what you desire. As I'm thinking that people that I know who might be coming from a different demographic, different economic group,
Yeah.
they're going to come to your project and they're going to, as they meet you, they're going to think the fact that you even have the project, the fact that you even have the sign, the fact that you even have the time to travel the country to ask the question,
Yeah.
they're going to assume that capitalism works.
Yeah.
And even if you have people volunteering to help you, those people, the fact that they even have the time to help you to build it, and then the fact that, and then that's human, then that's the human, and then the part of the capitalism definition that you gave. So they're going to say, well, and then the existence of the sign is going to assume that maybe it was supposed to answer no, because you answered the question. Some people are going to say, well, because the sign is there, I'm supposed to answer no.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, because the sign is there, it's working.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of people ask me if it's worked for me, and
And obviously it has.
No, it hasn't.
Well, I guess the thing is, I think you're answering the question from your worldview.
Sure, and everyone.
And so somebody from a completely different, who comes from a different road in that society, they're going to say, if you say capitalism does not work for you, then that's offensive to where I'm coming from.
Well, then I get to talk to them about it, right? And there, I think I have good reasons. No one's challenged me on my reasons why I say no. And like I kind of usually pick from a few. But you know, like my dad was a monk and my mom was a nun, which are not really like profitable careers. You know, and they left at 35 and they're like $100. The church gives you, it's like leaving prison, they give you a suit and a few $100. And so they started their lives at 35, started this business, and you know, I have this whole story about how the businesses, they made custom furniture, and during that period of like 75 to say 95, 98 is when particle board and you know, this kind of prefab construction, furniture, kitchen cabinets, the kind of stuff that you get at Home Depot and things like that now, like basically undermine the whole business. So they made this great product. They also did this thing where like would hire recent immigrants, guys from the VA. So I grew up in the shop with cocaine addicted Vietnam vets, you know, selling custom furniture in the richest neighborhoods in the Bay Area. And my parents made a great product. They were good business people. They hired, you know, like people that needed work and provided them with a living. And then eventually they just realized no matter how hard they worked, they couldn't do it. So that's one story. And then I have other ones about being an artist.
It's not your story.
It's my family. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're the only person that's ever called me out on that. And, you know, like, but my point is that's one example. But for people that, if they don't talk to me, then I can't do anything. And, you know, like, it's never going to work for every span of society, right? And so like, I'm hoping that will hit most. And when you do this kind of stuff, it's a gamble, right? Like, and I'm gambling that this will have more of a benefit than a cost. The sign actually was paid for by like 400 and some people that donated small amounts to make it happen. The newspaper was paid for the same way. So, you know, like there's these things that kind of complicate that I can talk to them about, and all I need to do is for them to ask if it's working for me, and then I can start that conversation.
I think it's good that it's asking a question, because most people don't ask questions, so that they can actually like exactly what your point is. They can have a chance to think about it. But then I was thinking, but then if the answer is just the majority is false, that doesn't mean that capitalism is bad. Because I was thinking that if in 1850 we asked the question, is does slavery work for me? The majority would say yes. That doesn't mean that's good. You know, so then the answer on either side doesn't mean if it's positive, doesn't mean that it's good, or if it's negative, doesn't mean that it's bad. You know, so then how do I then interpret the response if I'm walking by?
Yeah.
I mean, but then I get to think about it, like, which is the point.
Yeah. This guy.
Yes, I'm a retired economics professor visiting from St. Louis, Washington University, and I was going to give you a one-liner for capitalism. It's private ownership of the means of production, but that leads to a lot of questions because we hardly have a fully capitalist society. If you look at the whole educational sector, the healthcare sector, there's nonprofits and there's state universities and public education. So we hardly have a complete 100% private ownership of the means of production. And then there's the additional question, ownership by whom? And it's become ownership by fewer and fewer people. But I wanted to address one other thing.
Yeah.
And that was, you were talking about working well with others. I'm sorry, we got in late, but what I saw was great. You know, I just wish we'd been able to get here earlier. And it seemed to me, I've worked with Occupy St. Louis, and it seemed to me we got in a rut, you know. We sort of all marched down and sang with our signs and protests, Wells Fargo or Bank of America. And I think what artists could do that would really, really be useful for the Occupy movement is give them some creative ideas, new ways. Now, Occupy Wall Street, I think, is, you know, flashing things on the side of a building and so on. But, you know, we've been less creative in St. Louis and in other Midwest cities, and we really need that creative spirit. One little thing is that at one point I got together with an artist, a young lady who was trying to make her professional photography business work. And I had the data, and she had the creativity, and she did some great posters. You know, where she had to have a column going down to show how low the U.S. was, and you know, clever little gimmicks like that in the color. And I couldn't have done that, but she didn't have the data, and so that was a mini example of sort of working with an artist and trying to get the message over. I think that's, I'm sorry, I was a professor for very many years. I think it's, you know, there's a certain percentage of the people who are really on top of things, and, you know, and all the Citizens United, they could spend a million, a billion, $1 trillion, and it wouldn't influence our opinions. But there's a whole host of people who are just working to get by and, you know, really have trouble even identifying a candidate with a party or what the party stands for. And it's trying to reach that public that we have to do. And that is a double benefit, because I think they'll see that capitalism really isn't working for them. And the other thing is that will negate these negative attack acts. So with that, I'm done.
So there are two things you said. The thing about the means of production, there was a part I was talking about before, which is like you speaking in a language that people understand. I think, like as an economics professor or someone who's read Communist Manifesto, like I know what you mean by means of production, but like there's people who are asking me like, what does capitalism mean? And if you say means of production, they're like, whoa. You know, so like you really have to. I mean, that's the other good part about the interaction part, is that you get feedback. If you say means of production, and you see them like, you know, like you can kind of react to that. But the thing when I was like explaining my artworks, for trying to make sure that they were legible as artworks, or like what I was doing made sense as I would call my parents and explain it to them. If like my mom could get it, then, or my aunt or something, then it was like, then it worked. The other thing about ideas and like getting to St. Louis or something like with these kinds of ideas, our center, Crisis Activism, helped out with this book. We didn't do very much of it all, but this guy, Andrew Boyd, collected a bunch of ideas and examples of creative activism in a book called Beautiful Trouble that came out a couple weeks ago.
It's actually one coming out.
It's not out yet.
Yeah. Well, the party was a couple weeks ago. But it will be really good. It includes the guy Mark Reed who did the projection. Like a lot of the people that are working on Occupy Wall Street contributed stuff, and this like kind of the gang of folks that are thinking about these things. Everyone put in that, and it's all a couple pages long, like each example, and it's really just meant to inspire and give people ideas. So that will be available soon if that's any consolation. Yes?
3 quick points. Another phrase that we could use that they use in the movie is that capitalism is for profits for the people.
Yeah.
That is very cool. But I understand why you made the poster, just, the installation, not to ask is capitalism working for all of us, but it focuses on a very individualistic, it's very capitalist in terms of focusing on, is it working for me, as opposed to, does it work for the world, does it work for everybody? And I guess the third point that I want to make is, I think that and this relates to, I'm a teacher also, and it relates to people's understanding and how it would, to get into a real in-depth. I mean, yes, you have to communicate with people so that you're not using jargon phrases and stuff, but I think that we can't even evaluate would knowledge equal change when there's so little in-depth knowledge of what really is going on. See, so, and how art can stimulate that is the question.
Yeah. So the individual versus global kind of thing was like very conscious, so that when I was there in person, both to welcome people to do it. If you ask people, is capitalism work for the world? Then it's like, I don't really want to think about that. It becomes a little bit more manageable. It is meant to, I mean, I'm playing a little bit with voice there too, like the sign is in red, white, and blue, and flashing lights, and but it's really just a trick to draw people in and make that more manageable. That conversation does happen. And sometimes people read it as the world or America, or, you know what I mean? And then I have to say, let's think about just you for a minute. And that to me, again, is the starting point. As far as the other things, like, I have my ideas, and it makes sense to me. But if it doesn't make sense to you, then I think there's a lot of value in people approaching things from different ways. If we all did it my way, it probably wouldn't work. Like we all have to do different stuff. So I found that this works, and I've also found that a lot of people aren't considering, goals this way, or like how to break an audience into a group, or like, whether they're ready for a big global conversation or just getting that conversation started. That's been really helpful for me. But by no means is it like prescriptive. It's just another tool or lens to look at it. So anybody? Yeah.
Just a little comment, the thing you had about the equations, democracy equals capitalism. That was actually, when I was in high school, our books were laid that out. It's not an accident that people kind of think that way. It was really driven in, which is also a comment about art or words, the power of them to repeat and become true, because there was it laid out, capitalism versus totalitarianism, U.S. versus Russia, capitalism versus totalitarianism, and that was freedom, non-freedom, and right there on the thing,
Yeah, there's always
and people of my
implied
generation got like soaked into them.
Yeah.
And that has permeated, which also talks about the power of school books and then you go to the Texas Board of
Yeah.
Education and all of that, and how that's consciously written in.
Yeah, I didn't show other projects I've done, but I realized looking back, like I have done a lot of stuff that involves me going out and talking to strangers, because I've found that, like I might have an idea of how people think, but then when I'm actually talking to them, it's like, oh, they're actually a lot more informed than I thought they were, or misinformed, you know, and that like when I lived in the Bay Area before, and I lived in Brooklyn after that, you know, like these are like bubbles, you know? So making an effort to try to reach people that don't share the same viewpoint that I do yet. And like when I was young and starting out, it was like, oh, I read this in this book. Like I read people's history, and it's amazing. And like now, all I got to do is just, you know, make that big and like show everyone. If they saw what I saw, or if they traveled that same path, then they're going to end up in the same place I did. But there's a lot of other variables, you know. So that's when I realized that didn't work. That's when I was like, all right, well, what works? And it was discouraging for a long time. Yeah.
Something I really admire about you and your work is that you're asking us what matters with a lot of your pieces, and I think that's an important question. And that makes me wonder, you know, why did you choose Boston as a place to do your work? I think it's exciting. It's like young artists. It's like we all look up to you, and it's terrific work and inspiring, and it's like great to have a base here where art is almost like a secret to a lot of the city. Like this neighborhood is awesome, but you cross streets and it's completely different, and art's not on everybody's radar in the city, and it's like exciting to have you here. So I was curious how you got to Boston.
Well, it's not as glorious or noble. I'm kind of a mercenary. So I lived in the Bay Area, and I basically was there, you know, this place, the IBM Center for Art and Technology was like, we want to have you as a fellow, we'll pay you, you know, like a stipend, and you can do whatever you want. And I was like, all right, let's go to New York. You know, no plan on ever living in New York. And then that started to end, and my teaching jobs were ending there, contracts were ending, and I was applied for a job here and was offered a job here, and it just seemed to work, and I ended up here. And you know, when I get offered the next job, I might go somewhere else. But like this is a more boring sort of personal thing of like working 2 or 3 days a week teaching as a full-time professor, you know, and being able to teach some of this stuff too, and make a good amount of money, and then be able to do projects like this at a loss. That is great. So I kind of have to go where that stuff works. So yeah, Boston picked me, I guess. Yeah, I wish it was more honorable, but it's not. And yeah.
There's a political economist, Saskia Sassen, who said that like Occupy to her is compelling for 2 reasons, and one, like 2 reasons beyond the fact of being like a demonstration. That like one, that it like creates like these kind of conversations. It's like it continually kind of makes space, it makes territory in like a world where things are increasingly privatized. And then the second thing she said was that it creates new capacities for people to engage with each other in the world. And like, I don't know, I'm interested in your take on this as like an educator and an artist, and like what is kind of the pedagogical, like life-creating potential of Occupy? It's like a big question, but
yeah, I've said before, like if the only mark that Occupy leaves is the ways how to run a meeting, that would be huge. I mean, like, having sat through some meetings for like anti-Iraq war stuff that got totally derailed, and you know, like, God, they're horrible, you know? Political meetings often are so terrible, and the very few Occupy meetings I've been to have been run so well in comparison. You know, just that you have, you might be laughing, but like, you didn't go to the meeting I was in San Francisco in 2003. It was just like, holy shit. I won't tell you, it's a long story, but anyway, you have a whole like group of people that understand the value of like, all right, you know, this is the topic, we have an agenda, we're limiting times, you can't talk as long as you need to, or as long as you want to, you need to like, you know, communicate this idea and the feedback and all that stuff. And just that organizational structure, that's huge. Yeah, I don't know. But I think that there's more. I don't know, but I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
In some way, it's like you're asking people to take position.
Remember you?
Yeah. It's like you're asking people to take position. Are you for or are you against? We'll come back to this at the end. But question, you know, bring more question. So when I think about capitalism, I know what I will answer. But then I think, what do I think about nature? Is nature working for me or not? Okay. Because actually nature is not working for me.
Yeah.
I think if we're all trying to change, we're trying to change nature. So capitalism becomes the answer. So, you know, and then I will even go further. I say, what does work?
Yeah.
And my feeling is that everything that a human being does, my answer would be nothing worse. I mean, you know, I've got an iPhone, it's working pretty well, it's the best technology, but in 50 years we'll laugh about this, and, you know, this was so bad, you know, so stupid, you know. So we're always looking for change.
Yeah.
And, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but so I decided to be very self-critical of everything. And I think nature, I cannot be critical of nature because nature is, I mean, yes, I can do something, I can create capitalism, it doesn't work. So there's an Italian philosopher who used to say, in my thought, I will always be critical. Everything I see, I will be critical. I will be basically negative. But in your action, I will always have the will to be positive. And I really like this idea, you know, so, you know, anything you bring, you know, in any question you will bring me, I will say, no, I'm against it. But if you say, are you willing to do this? Let's try. And, I don't know. Anyway, I just want to say.
I have something similar that's guided me. It's like, and I've given talks about this in the past, but like the idea of utopia. And so, yeah, you know, I think that there's another kind of prevailing idea that like, we're progress when it goes up, and we're at it, everything is the best that it's been now, and then we just have to keep going. Anything, you know, like the Republicans might think that the best was at 1950 and we dipped down a little bit, but we could get back there, you know. There's like different ideas of this, but basically that, you know, the world it's all gotten better. And my thing is like, but right now it's really great, and we need to hang on to that.
Well, that's a bourgeois attitude. Yeah, and this is a word we don't use in Europe, you know. Actually, we don't use this word as much. But the definition of a bourgeois is somebody who got success in life, who got rich, life is good. So they're going to resist any change because the change will mean they will have to give up the pleasure that they have. You know?
Yeah, we have them here too.
Yeah. So to go back to the position, you're asking people to take position. And then I'm thinking, well, everybody's taking position. I took position, you took position. And then if you will ask me, but what does work for you? Well, I took position, I'm an artist. So I guess art works for me. I did at the same time knowing it's just an illusion. It's like the Picasso sentence, you know, art is alive, but it brings me to the truth, you know. Not the truth in the sense of religious, but in the sense that I feel alive, you know, so I feel in relation. I don't feel any separation and any void, you know. Capitalism, you know, bring, you know, does, you know, it brings, you know, concern, you know, for some people. You know. Anyway, so that's the position.
Yeah.
Would you say what works for you? You say, well, not.
Well, what I was going to say is that the utopia idea is that like we're working towards getting to something better. That we haven't. This is not the best, right? And that the beginning point, or to break from that idea of like we've gotten somewhere really good and we need to cling to it, is like to really evaluate what we have. And anytime you do that, as you said, like, is this working? Not really. It kind of works, but it doesn't really work. You know.
Yeah.
That there might be something better, and what is better, and how can we get there? And my favorite poem about utopia, if I can remember right, is utopia exists on the horizon, and when I take 2 steps forward, it takes 2 steps back, and if I take 3 steps forward, it takes 3 steps back. What's the good of utopia? It's great for walking. And that we need to have. Jody Dean talks about this actually, and relates it to Occupy. Like communism actually, the great purpose of it served was that it provided somewhere out there a vision that you could use as a point on the horizon. Whether you wanted to stray from it a little bit or not, but it was a point on the left that was way out there. And that now that no one takes it seriously anymore, or too many people don't take it seriously anymore, we don't have that point out there that we can walk towards. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do with all my practice is like, hey, like this is not so great. Like, what could be better? Like, let's figure it out together, and let's not be limited by the ideas that are presented in media or in science fiction movies or whatever. Like, we can have whatever we want, really, you know. And I find that most of the backwards ideas are ideas that have, in my opinion, been limited by, you know, what you've been taught in school, what you encounter in the media, and things like that. Okay. I'm just wanting to say it cloud. Does this anybody else? We can do whatever, but.
Yeah, people are, I'm fine with people to keep chatting.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah?
Okay.
I learned this thing when I was at elementary school. You ask if there's questions and you count to 5 in his head. You said, does anybody have any questions? Nobody's going to do it.
I think there are a lot of ideas in the room that I think people could talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just walk around.
Yes.
Yeah. We have food downstairs, as well as from here. We're going to screen Yes Men Fix the World, followed by a documentary and direct action.
That hasn't been released yet.
That has not been released yet. Directed by Emily James, called Just Do It. So feel free to hang out here and talk, or maybe we'll start the film in like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like maybe for 15, we'll give people some time to grab some food and beer.
Yeah. There's a lot of rice and lentils downstairs.
Yeah.
So please take some.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.